Hey everybody, my name is Alex, and this is Bento Radio. Now, before we get started, I just want to get some stuff out of the way first, just the general podcast, YouTube, social stuff. That's the first part being, if you're new here and you just joined and you just subscribed on the YouTube channel from the last What I've Been Watching video, welcome. I'm glad that you liked me enough to subscribe, and I hope that you stick around. I've got a bunch of stuff planned for this year for you guys that I think you'll really like, including this episode, which we'll get to in a second. The second is, if you absolutely love this show and you're listening to it on your podcast platform of choice, or you're watching it on YouTube right now, you can go to this show's website, which is bento-box.ghost.io, and get a lot more. Little write-ups for every episode, including this one, and some articles that I've done over years that I post on there. I keep saying I'm going to finish an article that I've been working on for a while, or staring at once a week, and saying I need to work on for a while. I'll get to it, I hope. I'm very busy. But that's where all of my stuff lives. Whatever I do will go up over there at some point, pretty close to when I announce it or do it anywhere else. Because I'm the only person doing this, so I'm human. Sometimes I get lazy, sometimes stuff comes up, sometimes life happens, all that stuff. And on that note, if you want to follow me somewhere, you can follow me over on Instagram at Alex Holt Cohan, or over on Blue Sky, which is, I think, also at Alex Holt Cohan over there. I'm not a frequent poster, but I do post things I think are interesting every once in a while in both places, so go check that out. And of course, if you really love the podcast, be sure to subscribe to it on your podcast player of choice. Or if you really love watching these YouTube editions of it, be sure to subscribe to the YouTube version and hit the notification bell so new episodes drop, although they generally drop, once again, really unless something comes up, on Thursday nights at around 7 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. So I try to make that universal across both the audio and video versions of the podcast. So there's that. Now, without further ado, I want to jump into what we're talking about this week, and that's a lesser-known show from 2006 called Flag. And to give us a proper plot synopsis of Flag, I'm going to throw it over to I right now, so take it away, I.
Flag is set in a fictional Asian country called Udiana, which has long been plagued by civil war. Amidst the conflict, a young Japanese photojournalist named Saiko Shirasu captures a powerful photograph of local citizens raising a makeshift flag during a peace demonstration. This image becomes an international symbol of hope and a turning point in peace negotiations. However, just before a historic peace treaty is to be signed, the flag is stolen by a terrorist faction, reigniting tensions and threatening the fragile peace. To recover the flag and prevent the collapse of the peace process, a secret special forces unit known as the SDF, Special Development Forces, is deployed. Saiko, having taken the original photo, is embedded with the unit to document the mission. The story is told through a unique documentary-style presentation, using found footage, photographs, video logs, and narration. This perspective-driven format immerses the viewer in the ethical and psychological weight of war, journalism, and truth.
With that synopsis out of the way, I want to do a little show and tell before I dive into Flag proper. So, for Christmas, as a gift from my family, I got this year a Polaroid camera, actually. This is a Polaroid Now Plus. I've been messing around with it since Christmas morning, essentially. And I really enjoy it. It's a ton of fun. If you are into the idea of maybe manual physical photography, I encourage you to look at Polaroid, because that means you don't have to afford darkroom costs and all that stuff, which can get significantly more expensive than even the expense of their specialized cartridges for these cameras. And they have a great warranty program, so you can go running around with these things, and within the year, as long as the warranty is valid, if something happens, you're covered. So I've really been having a lot of fun with that. But that's not the only camera that I even own. I have a bunch of cameras, including a little old Canon G11 PowerShot from forever ago. I think it's a third generation Cam Snap, and I actually have the Cam Snap Pro, which I use significantly more than this camera, but I keep this camera around because it got waterlogged at some point and it will never be the same again, so it's not like I can put it up on anything like Facebook Marketplace and be like, hey, $5 for this, because it functions, but it's not a clean experience the way you would want out of this camera if you bought it new for about, I think, including taxes, it's like $80. Before taxes, it's $60, which is exceptionally cheap for like reusable digital camera of any kind. And then I have the camera that I largely learned photography on in college, because when I went to college for graphic design, my program required us to take a photography course. So I needed a camera, and this is a ProMaster 2500 PK Super. It's not a great camera because the camera I was supposed to use, which had been in my family for a long time, locked up. And if you know anything about cameras, when they lock up, that's the equivalent of them throwing in the towel. That's the equivalent of them dying. Once a camera locks up, you can't use it ever again, because all the mechanisms inside of it are just locked in place. And physical cameras usually don't need a huge battery, but they do have a lot of moving parts. And so I have everything from really complicated, interesting. Actually, I have a Nikon camera that's like full-on digital DSLR that I didn't bring over because it's a little unwieldy, especially for me with one hand. But my point is that I deeply appreciate photography. I always have deeply appreciated photography. I, as a creative person, have always deeply appreciated any kind of image making in general. And there are people who consider photography not to be an art form. I always think they're crazy. Some of those people are like my best friends. You're insane. That couldn't be me. But my point is that I am, especially now with a new analog camera, I'm pretty primed to watch a show about not just photography, but a specific subset of photography, and that's what Flag is. But the interesting thing about Flag is not necessarily the story, although the story does hilariously, and I've seen it before, and I always forget that I've seen Flag before. I've seen it probably 3 times at this point. The story of Flag is not necessarily as interesting as the production of Flag. And that's saying something, because the story is a pretty good story. It's a pretty good, thought-out story about war. Everything's pretty fleshed out, pretty researched. The actual meat and potatoes of what happens in the show is pretty thoughtful and pretty clearly researched. The weird religion that is practiced by the people in the country that the show takes place in does feel like a real religion. It feels like mixes of old Chinese subsets of religions and old Southeast Asian subsets of religions that have been congealed into this thing that exists only for this show, as far as I can tell. And obviously borrowing from things like Buddhism and Hinduism and all these other things to create a fantasy religion that they can use to tell as a backdrop to tell this story about a country that's on the verge of war. And the flag motif is a little far-fetched, but it doesn't feel that far-fetched by the time you're in the midst of the show. And on top of that, the way they tell the story is both novel and interesting, and the use of dual protagonist thing is really interesting, actually, because the dual protagonist, they give you this idea of the dual protagonist happening for almost the entire show uninterrupted until a very specific point. And then you realize that a lot of it was a singular protagonist. So, full on, if you haven't seen the show and you're interested in seeing the show is very hard to watch. You can actually watch at least the first episode here on YouTube. You can just search Flag Anime Episode 1 and it should come right up. And it's the full episode. Don't need to watch it in multiple parts or anything. The problem that I found is when you try and watch episode 2 and 3, you gotta go hunting for those. And it's early enough in the show you don't necessarily want to skip them. I don't know of anywhere to find those. I have it in my personal collection, and I have for a while on a digital level from the bad old days when I was a broke college kid and up to some nonsense in the gray world of illegal anime streaming and acquisition. I don't even want to say the word, but suffice to say, I've had this thing for a while. And I can tell you, Wink, you can still go find it. It is actually available one place that I've found so far, and that is, in its entirety rather, that is, it's available free, it's available for the first episode free, but the other 12 episodes are 255 yen, which is the equivalent of $1.60 per episode, over on Bandai's streaming channel, which is called Bandai Channel. I don't know if it's subtitled, I don't know if it's dubbed. A subtitle track and a dubbed track for the show both exist. I don't know if those are available on the Bandai site because everything's in Japanese. If you don't mind watching it in Japanese, or you can understand Japanese fluently enough, you can definitely go over there and rent them. I didn't press rent on any of them because I'm not sure if they'll even play, but they're listed there. So that's probably your best option if you can, if you don't need subtitles. But otherwise, there are ways to find it. It is just well known enough, even after 20 years. That's right, this thing is 20 years old, literally this year. It came out in 2006, so it's been 20 years since this thing was made, that you can still find it if you how to look. But the point is that this thing, and the reason why that is, actually, is that it was produced in a pretty unique way for the time. It was among the first ONAs. So what does that mean? What does an ONA mean? An ONA is similar to an OVA or an OAV, which are interchangeable terms largely, although not entirely. An OVA is basically a direct-to-video anime, or an only video animation. An OAV is like a reworking of those words, but sometimes it's slightly different. An ONA is an only net animation, which means that it was produced originally for the internet. In the very early days of streaming and in the waning days of the anime bubble, companies were struggling to figure out how to make it worth it to watch their shows. And one of the things that the companies that were responsible for this show, Flag, came up with were, let's produce a thing that is exclusively for the web. That is a full 13-minute anime, but it will be primarily put out on the internet. Now, that's a really cool forward-thinking idea for the time, back in 2006, 20 years ago. But the thing that happens there is, because they were putting it out themselves, it wasn't going on streaming platforms. It didn't even come to something like Crunchyroll. Not that Crunchyroll existed in the way that it does now, but it didn't go to streaming platforms. They didn't even have that opportunity because they were putting it out themselves. There used to be a streaming platform that was started by Tommy, the anime production house, that was exclusively for their shows for a little while, and a couple years back. That thing went bust pretty quickly, actually, because when you're trying to build a platform, you have to compete with the other platforms, and that was much easier in 2006, but this thing got a lot of press at the time. So people knew about it, people in my old otaku sphere have definitely seen the show. It was like a big deal when it came out. I remember it being a big deal when it came out, at least. And there's a certain kind of old, very dadly otaku who you say Flag to, and his eyes go glossy and he just remembers it, because it is, all at once, a very military otaku show, a very artsy show. It is a real robot show. It's got geopolitics in there. A maximum World War II dad show in its way. But push comes to shove, and the unique show ended up working against it. And because it was on the web first, eventually they released it as a physical release, and I believe Aniplex was the producers. They may have put out the discs afterwards. But Bandai was a licensor. And eventually Bandai America went under. and Bandai Entertainment went under. Bandai still exists as of, like, they're in Japan, but not so much here. And the license never got picked up. Because it was a weird artsy show that, while critically respected, doesn't rise to, like, ground-shaking levels, even though part of the reason I'm talking about it is because it's really, I think, worth your time if you can finagle your way into seeing even only the first episode, because it's a really interesting thing. So, wrote the blog post early for this one because I had, like, an angle in my head that I wanted to talk about, and that was primarily the production quality of this and, like, of what happened to it, and the way that it became kind of together that things like Paradise Kiss and Paranoid Agent were in for a very long time. And, like, you wouldn't expect to have been unlicensed for decades. A perfect example of this is, was very recently rectified, was, like, a couple years ago, like, I think it was licensed, rescued finally in, like, 2021, Evangelion. Evangelion was for a different reason. They just wanted too much money for it, and nobody was willing to pay it until Netflix was like, we got the scratch in the backseat, let's just do it. But Evangelion was this huge show. It is still, like, a revolutionary moment in anime. But the company that made it was so corrupt at a point that they've now gone the way of the dinosaur. And they wanted too much money for it. So nobody was willing to pay that amount for Evangelion, even though it was this groundbreaking show. Same thing was a little bit true of Panty and Stocking, I'm sure, and that's why we're getting the new Panty and Stocking, like, years after the fact, even though that I literally asked the directors, like, what is your plan for this? And they said, 5 seasons in a goddamn movie, which is hilarious and great. But, short of it is that this show is still in, like, hell and still in, like, the deep, dark void of lost to kind of time, because it's not... I guarantee you people know about it. I guarantee you that there are people who know about anime who know about this show. I have no doubt Justin Sudeikis knows about it. There's a non-zero chance that he mastered the discs, but it just doesn't have the math there all the time. And a real actual crying shame about stuff like this is stuff just doesn't have the math. So, like, meaningful works of art, things that are, like, affecting and thoughtful and interesting, like Flag, go by the wayside because the numbers don't work out. Or some other thing is blocking them. But very often it's because the numbers don't work out. And so this thing fell into kind of, for as far as I can tell, still. It is, a perfect example, if you search Flag Anime on Google, and you switch over to images, the first, at the time of me recording this at least, the first couple images, the first rows of images are from the Flag Anime, and that's, like, all the promotional stuff, images of the DVD box art, all that stuff. And after that, it, like, anime have nothing to do with that are in no way related, and it's a whole weird thing. But what's the show actually like? The reason why I said that in the very beginning of this, that it's got a unique storytelling perspective, is because, unlike many other shows, it is told entirely in first person, but not quite first person, because it's told entirely from the perspective of a camera somewhere in the actual physical world of the show. Either it's the main character Shirasu's, the main protagonist Shirasu's camera, or it's the secondary protagonist Akagi's camera, or it's some camera somewhere in the actual physical space. That can include a camera on the real robot, which is like a big show. A camera that's like a room. There's, at the very end of the show, there's a scene that takes place using a web camera as its camera. The times when you see Shirasu, it's because she either sees her reflection in the shot when she's trying to get a shot, or she put her camera down and she's in front of it. And this makes it for a really interesting watch for 2 reasons. And once again, spoiler alert for this entire show, because the stuff I want to talk about here specifically is up until I believe it's episode 9 or 10, you don't really drop the camera bit. And then all of a sudden, in episode 9 or 10, I think it's called The Earths of the Land is the actual title of the episode. Shiratsu shuts down her camera, and she puts it to the side, and you stay with her perspective. So for the first time in the show, you're not the kind of perspective of a camera. For almost the entire show, everything is framed by all the, digital camera, elements of, there's a light meter on the bottom of the screen constantly, there's shot framing stuff all over the screen, there's, the center screen stuff of a camera, there's a battery indicator, which, hilariously, this took me out of it a little bit. The battery indicator is never not full. It never ticks down, which I don't know if you've ever used camera on video for any length of time. That drained pretty quickly. But, I just noticed that it uses cameras. But my point is that the camera artifice is always there. And then all of a sudden it's not. And it's also one of the only times when a character has been straight up film me. Want to film me. This feels weird and insane. No. And it's this really affecting episode because Shiratsu is framed as a photojournalist, and so is the other protagonist, Akagi, and we'll get to Akagi in a little bit. But up until that point, you are seeing through a camera. You are seeing the world as if you were seeing this video with my time clock and recording symbol in the corner, the little stuff on the other corner, the little thing indicating a memory card, the little thing indicating the battery, and the time clock in the top left corner of this video. But in that moment, when you drop all that away, you understand that Shiratsu as a character is having a really personal experience here. She's experiencing this doctor who chose to be a folk doctor. It was just for this one particular episode. And she's really hearing his story. It's not a thing that she's intentionally taking photos of to share with the rest of the world. And it's really actually the only time that happens in the entire show. Because the next time that happens, much later in the show, when you're watching it happen, all of a sudden it's digital artifacting. All of a sudden, it's like the video is damaged. Because it is a video. And what you're seeing there, and once again, spoiler alerts for this entire show, including the ending, which I'm going to spoil right now, so if you want to watch this show, I encourage you to go figure that out and watch this later, is a memorial piece. What you are watching, a memorial piece cut together by Akagi, Shiratsu's friend and mentor, who's also a 4-time photojournalist who is in the same area. And the show has been cutting kind of this entire time between his camera and her camera the entire time. You're watching a memorial piece that Akagi cut together from the footage that Shiratsu took, and you're seeing her side of this story. And you've kind of clued into that, Akagi's character, you're watching the outsider journalist side of the story, and with Shiratsu's character, you're watching the insider documentary style photojournalist side of the story. But it's made clear in the last episode that what you're seeing is the fact that Shiratsu died here. That this was Shiratsu's big break and also her last break. Because once everything happened, once the story concludes, her real life calls. Her brother calls and says, you don't shut up about asking when you're going to get home because it's his birthday on Monday. And she's like, well, I wanted to catch a flight. And there's a bombing at the airport. And she dies. And so this entire time that the show is laying it on thick with the importance of photography and the significance of single photos throughout time. Think about the photo of the flag of Iwo Jima. The photo of Trump raising his fist, which is a really recent one. These are really famous photos that galvanize things in the world, that change the world. There's another famous photo of a monk setting himself on fire in protest of self-immolating in protest, I believe, of the Vietnam War. And there's a lot of photos like that. Photos are really powerful. But the other thing that's kind of true is that of all of the forms of image making have been the most democratized, because we all have these things in our pockets, and we all take pictures of everything. You know, the point where, like, you order something on Amazon, when you log into Amazon and see if it's shown up, you can tell because they give you a picture of the package. Part of the reason why I got back into physical photography is because I like the idea of, like, the world and of image making using the world that exists. And I've taken some really excellent pictures in my life, just because I found I've had an eye for it. But the art form of photography and of video making has been brought down to everybody. Even in 2006, we had digital cameras. We had, like, the flip video is a tiny video camcorder that could take like hours worth of video and store it on a card on the camera. That was like the size of the cell, of like a little bit smaller, a little bit squatter and thinner than a cell phone, but like 3 thick. And actually, there's a character in this show who has like the equivalent of a flip video, and he takes pictures of Shirasu. His little pocket cam is one of the cameras that you see parts of the show through. Specifically, like, specific photos of Shirasu, the true main character for most of the show. But in kind of down the art of photography to kind of instrumental and useful thing that people do, this show does that in a real way. But it almost lulls you into a sense of complacency. Because there are real moments of danger for Shirasu, and there are real moments of danger for Akagi. But just when you think the show's about to let Shirasu go home, just when you think the show's going to wrap up and everything's going to be sunshine and roses, she dies. In the waning conflict of something she helped stop from happening. And then the final credit scene happens. So this entire time, you've been met with a very preachy opening credits that's set to, like, inspirational music to make PowerPoints 2.exe kind of nonsense song at the very beginning. And at the end, you have this really hopeful, really beautiful song that takes you on, like, a kind of tour through what you know to be Akagi's room studio. And it shows all of these pictures of Shirasu and of all the members of the SDC, which is the military unit she's embedded with, whose sole mission is to go get the flag back. Because the reason that Shirasu's here at all is because, like it said in the summary, that she took this picture that made this flag famous. So they brought her along essentially to document them getting it back, so they could use it to, like, flag's value again, so it's a good bargaining chip for peace. Or at least that's what they said. It alluded that there's more to it than that, but you never told exactly how much more. And in that whole thing, they end on a camera that eventually you find out to be Shirasu's camera. And it's got a little charm on it. I remember I told you that in, like, episode 9 or 10, the one called Yurts of the Land, you see the show for the first time from the actual point of view of Shirasu, not from her camera or a camera in the world. The next time you see that is her talking to a couple local girls from the country they're in about their little charms, and she shows them hers. And then there's the video artifacting and damaged footage, and then it bumps back and it repeats. And that's your first hint that you're not watching her perspective. You're watching a video. Back in the yurt with the doctor, you're watching her perspective. Here you're watching the video. Here you're in kind of res, watching in real time a video that she took. And in the very last end credits, they don't just end on the camera. They end on the camera with a little charm, and then for the first time, the camera of the show pans around her digital camera, and you see that it was rescued from the scene of the bomb. You see that the other side of the camera is shredded, that the thing will never work again. It's a confirmation that she's not happy somewhere. She's not alive. She didn't survive that. she's no longer there. She sacrificed herself to the scoop, so to speak. And the reason that she just came out was when she got picked up by the military police and they confiscated all of her footage. The commander for the SDCF gets a character's name, copied her SD card, sewed it into her little charm, and made sure she got it. And she gave that SD card with all of that footage to Akagi in case anything ever happened to her, and said he was the scoop of a lifetime. And Akagi, distraught at his, and protege's death, unexpected and completely unearned death, and completely manipulated into death, which is strongly implied by the story that, UNS, which is the show's light rebranding of the UN, orchestrated her dying. So the whole thing is more, and important, and that flag is now really important because the photographer who took the photo of the flag that inspired people to peace then died in trying to recover it when it was taken by a fanatical cult leader, essentially. The whole show has been Akagi basically processing his own grief. And I'll tell you, last ending sequence hits like a truck. It absolutely hits like a truck. It's really affecting, even though it's manipulative and he's being manipulative, and he dies in the last episode, or in the second to last episode or something, that the show is being manipulative, that the show didn't need to do that they could give you the happy ending that the show was clearly driving towards, without the, twist of, now she's dead. It still works. It still hits you like a ton of bricks. And I just thought that, it was an interesting thing. And I think people that talk about lost media on social media, especially around anime, and by and large, that is nonsense. Lost media is, very different thing than what people are talking about. What they're talking about is forgotten media. What they're talking about is media that existed in its time and was popular in its time and maybe had meaningful effects on stuff we still watch today. For example, when Jujutsu Kaisen had its Chozo fight where he did the blood laser from a first-person perspective, that hit the anime fandom like speed bricks thrown from a car. It was people. And now, the way that lots of anime flex their animation muscles is doing first-person action scenes. This show came out in 2006. And maybe it wasn't necessarily an action show. You weren't seeing, parkour over the streets of this, city. But it was done entirely from a POV perspective. It makes no... you never leave the perspective of either Shiratsu or the camera. Either Shiratsu or a camera somewhere in the world. You can't tell me that doesn't hop, skip, and jump to the kind of doing really high budget, really lavishly animated, first person point of view animation cuts now. At least in the same conversation. And then of course there's live action films like Hardcore Henry. I think it's Hardcore Henry that's action films shot entirely in first person where star had to stunts with up with GoPros or something for the entire movie. But also, person video game perspective, all of this stuff goes into all of that. What most people are talking about when they talk about lost media, they're talking about forgotten media. They're talking about stuff that was, like I said, popular in its time, leading edge in its time, that has since gone the way of all things. And part of the reason why I want to do this was to tell you, somebody said, talks about, that's a hero, or that's older than about 3 years. That's not lost media. That's barely even forgotten media. They're doing that for views and engagement. The same way I know that 900 people who don't make it to this part of the video will ask me about this poster, especially in these shorts. People will be like, yo, good point, but what about that poster, though? And that's all engagement bait. If you want, forgotten media, if you want real lost media, it is out there. you can go looking for it. You think about this for a different personal project I'm working on. I've got a bunch of personal projects right now. Hazard of the beginning of the year, I guess. But there's this encouragement by all of the social media apps, and I'm including things like apps for anime, of which there are a couple. The main one is My Anime List, to collect. Just about every version of social media has a save option on every post. You can save this video to watch it later. You can save a tweet to read it later. You can save a post on Threads to watch it later. You can save a post on Blue Sky to watch it later, to read it later. But will you? You can save on every short video platform to watch that stuff later. But will you gonna do anything with it? What use of those things? And a really good use of My Anime List, if you want to find locked media like Flag, like Fighting Foodons, like Bakugan, like a number of shows that were on before you even knew anime was a thing, is to click over to the production tab. It's to go to the production section and see what else people have done, and just go down rabbit holes and find weird stuff you've never heard of and try to figure out how to watch it. I have the advantage of having been watching this stuff for 3 decades now. So I saw Flag when it came out. I was sitting thinking about what I wanted to talk about and this week, and a couple days before I need to start something if I wanted to watch something short. And I heard an echo in the back of my head, how about Flag? When was the last time you watched Flag, or tried to watch Flag, or watched it all the way through because you got frustrated because you couldn't find this portion of episodes? Maybe give it an honest go at it. Maybe use your incredible powers of evil to watch Flag. And I did that. You can do that too. And it's a big part of the reason why I wanted to make this episode. I think that it's unfortunate that this show has, lost the annals of technology and time. But I don't think it has to be. I think you can go, because I did it myself, you can go find the show. You can just watch the show. And it's maybe not the best, but it's certainly interesting, and it's an interesting, artistic throw at the wall, at the very least, is what I would say. And once again, looking at my personal reviews, by episode, which I actually tried to do with this show first, and I'm going to try and do with other shows going on through the future. Almost every episode was, see if I can't look at it. Almost every episode was a 3 out of 5 to me. Except for one, and that one was, I believe it was it was episode 9. Episode 9 is the one where she drops the camera. And that one shot up to a 4. That episode to me was excellent, because it's the premise of the show to effectively do storytelling in full and interesting and cool, but still in character way. And then in episode, I believe it's episodes later. So it's got to be episode 13. Episode 13 went doing it as a way to tell you something happened to the main character. On that note, actually I'm going to leave it. Hey, I hope you enjoyed the podcast, and if you did, be sure to subscribe wherever you're listening or watching. If you're listening to it on a podcast platform and they allow you to give a 5-star review, be sure to do that. If you're watching this on YouTube and you really liked what you saw, be sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel and like the video. In addition, if you want to make sure that you don't miss a beat, be sure to hit that notification bell so you know when new episodes drop. But if you're wondering, they drop every Thursday night Eastern time. And on that note, if you really love the podcast and you really love what I'm trying to do here, be sure to give the website a look. That website is bento-box.ghost.io. There will be a link in the description of either this podcast or this video. It'll also be linked in the description of the entire podcast on the information page. It'll also be linked in the description of the YouTube channel. So there's plenty of ways for you to get to that website and check it out. If you want to follow me, my social links are also listed in the footer of that page. So once again, go over there to find that stuff. But I hope you like the episode. I look forward to talking to you next time. But until next time, I have been Alex. This has been Bento Radio, and I'll talk at you later.